This is a story from Pat Eadie, who was a Boeing pilot years ago and from a very well-known West Coast family. The story is called Assaulting a Black with a Boeing. Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, lies just south of the equator on a plateau averaging 5,000 feet above sea level. The climate of this equatorial city is enormously different to the second largest city, Mombasa, the east coast port, which gives Kenya access to the Indian Ocean. The higher plateau has a greater rainfall and a cooler climate than that of the coastal strip. It has problems for the aviator common to many high-altitude airfields around the world. In 1981, a new airport terminal was opened on the opposite side of the airport to the existing complex, which had grown over the years but had proved inadequate in both size and design. In 1973, when the new terminal was still a technical drawing and a sheaf of specifications, I was landing my Boeing at Nairobi. Another crew would continue the scheduled service southbound, while we as the slip crew would then have a day off. Nairobi Airport has one very long runway with modern radio aids to accommodate the landing of the world's largest airliners. Not yet do they have the sophisticated elements of blind landing facilities, and not always do they have even the basics available. There is no spare equipment and no backup to have available 100% guarantee of the equipment being serviceable, a factor to be taken into account when one is planning the fuel requirement. The handling of both aircraft and passengers was sadly lacking in expertise and ancillary functions that normally accorded to airport passengers in the industrial north. The aircraft parking area adjacent the terminal building equated in size to 3 Wembley football pitches. However, unlike the level grass surface at Wembley, the concrete tarmac was decidedly undulating. This was intended to provide stormwater drainage in times of high rainfall. These drains could be as much as 20 inches from top of the rise to the bottom of the drain. Extending from the terminal side of the aircraft parking area into the distance, they resembled a giant sheet of corrugated iron. When constructed, the up and down grades enabled an aircraft to roll over the top of one corrugation, down the slope of the next, and so on. That was in the days of the DC-3s. No due allowance was ever anticipated on getting a Boeing to traverse this mountainous set of sand dunes. The idea was sound, but the drains never did cope with the volume of water. In the rainy seasons, long pools lay in the low-lying areas of tarmac while the ridges stood clear. To get the passenger steps to the aircraft door, when the tarmac was flooded, required the aircraft exit to be adjacent a ridge on the tarmac. This enabled the passenger steps to be pulled along the ridge by a battery-powered tug. These tugs were designed for towing baggage trolleys on a dry surface, not to pull passenger steps, a far heavier object, along a flooded surface. Their electrics were not sufficiently waterproofed and they had inadequate traction. Therefore, in towing the steps, they were restricted to the higher ridges of the tarmac. To arrange this alignment required the nose wheels stop over a ground position indicated by yellow lines. So judging the position of a nose wheel accurately was one aspect of experience in ground handling. Approaching the stop point, the aircraft would traverse the concrete ditches at right angles to the lie of the drain. And by doing so, the aircraft accelerated when the main wheels rolled down the slope and decelerated as it climbed the other side. To avoid the surge in speeds, the aircraft could be caught with an unusually great pulsating throttle movement. On our early morning arrival, the weather was fine and the tarmac dry. When taxiing into the terminal, a coarse use of the throttles could persuade the aircraft to climb and descend the ridges while maintaining a slow but uniform speed. There were 3 or 4 ridges to negotiate before the aircraft finally came to a halt. with the nose wheel over the yellow line, positioned halfway down the slope of one ridge and the main wheels halfway up the slope of a previous one. And then the tug towed the steps along the top of the ridge to line up with the front door. The black African lad and his mate were 30 yards in front of the final nose wheel position, with bright orange hats to usher me into the correct position. Pulling up to the short yellow line, we came to a halt with the brakes applied and the engines returned to idle. Although the nose wheel is hidden from the cockpit, a mark is pinpointed on the ground adjacent to the yellow line. With this visible reference, it is comparatively simple to halt the aircraft on a predetermined spot. For some obscure reason, the marshaller, to give him his correct title, began beckoning me to bring the aircraft further forward. Having started the close-down procedure with one of the 4 engines stopped meant that only 3 engines were available to make the main wheels move up the slope. It proved difficult to move the aircraft. 200 tons of metal took a lot of shifting uphill, but the marshaller continued to frantically wave his bats. Cancelling the closing down checks, I attempted to nudge the aircraft forward to comply with the marshaller's directions. Estimating that the nose wheel was on the yellow line, it could not be more than 2 or 3 inches out at most, I viewed his performance as pedantic and reflecting the calibre of the airport employees. "What the hell is this chap playing at?" I voiced my objection to the crew. I opened up to 50% power on 3 engines, but the aircraft would not budge. A further increase in power, and the aircraft started to strain forward, first by an inch, then as even more power was applied, a further few inches of forward movement. I could not have moved the aircraft more than 6 inches when there was frantic waving of the orange bats as the black lad gave the signal to stop. I was furious. Having operated a long time into the African continent, I knew that it was useless complaining about the competency of a black national. "Time will come," I conceded with a hidden threat to my crew. "Time will come." Anyway, 6 days later we returned to Nairobi. Monstrous thunderstorms had soaked the countryside, the surface depressions were brimful of water, the night sky was overcast and dark, still occasionally lit by distant thunderstorms. The total cloud cover excluded the moon that had previously illuminated the cloud tops. On the ground, apart from the runway and taxiway lights, the airfield was in complete darkness. It was not expected to have the lights around the passenger terminal affected by heavy rain. When the aircraft approached the tarmac, the only visible movement was the frantic waving of a pair of orange bats. This is it, I thought. Same fella, same place. William Prescott's quotation during the Civil War had a certain ring to it. "Wait till you see the whites of their eyes." With the lights on the taxi position, only 10% of the total available, the aircraft negotiated the first hill. It all but stopped, by design, on the first rise and likewise on the second. The orange bats were now being waved so fast that they appeared as a blur reflecting in my lights. The marshaller's mate, distinguishable only by a pinpoint of light from his torch, seemed ignorant of where it should be directed. Coming up to the third rise, I opened all 4 engines to 80% power and at the same time flicked the switch to bring the landing lights up to 100% strength. The result could not have been more spectacular. The noise, all 110 decibels, coupled with the high-intensity lights and water, whipped some 100 feet into the air from the ditch immediately behind the jet engine efflux, formed a great illuminated halo in the sky, silhouetting the aircraft. This was all too much for the man with the orange bat and his mate with the torch. The bats fell to the ground as the marshaller and his mate raced for the scrub in fear of their lives. Closing the throttles effected a gentle winding down of power on all four engines. The aircraft rolled gently forward, coming to rest on the yellow line. Within 30 seconds, the doors were opened and the steps pushed to the open exit. Unfortunately, however, this incident was witnessed by the company's area manager and an entourage of black government officials standing on top of the arrival building, awaiting my VIP passengers. Nothing was said at the time referring to the disappearance of the black marshaller and his mate into the scrub. But some 6 weeks later, I was asked to reply to an inquiry about this incident. The chairman of this committee in London, a fellow captain and colleague, had had similar problems when operating through Nairobi, but unlike myself, had not had the opportunity to register his dissatisfaction at the standards prevailing. I was deemed not guilty, although it was intimated I could have been a little more politically correct and sympathetically attuned to the ruling ethnic group. As the diplomatic office had elected to observe the proceedings of the inquiry, a decision was required to have some sense of disciplinary action. I was to be taken off the African route for a period of 10 weeks and re-rostered to the North Atlantic. It was my private wish that the penalty incurred could have been of a permanent nature. After all, who the hell wants to go to Africa?